tells me, Philip, I have a big operation here. I have so many challenges. Why do I need to focus on food waste? And I tell him, usually the first thing I tell him is, first, you don't even know how big the problem is. Don't pay me for 2 days. I'm going to come for 2 days and I will show you how much is being thrown away. And if you see the amount of food, and I give you a prediction, if that is true, you hire me and we work together. Every time it was true, Roshan. Throwing away food, you're throwing away money. Once they start realizing, okay, I can really shrink my food cost here and I can really help my margin, they start listening to you.
So today the conversation often jumps straight into technology and AI. Let's build a tool, let's optimize with algorithms. So you have been speaking and podcasting specifically about AI and food waste recently. So from your vantage point, Philip, where can AI and data genuinely help tackle waste across the value chain? Is it in production, storage, transport, retail, households, or all the above?
All the above.
Hello and welcome to the Carbon Circle, the podcast from Carbon Mandal, Sustainability Consulting Services, where we dive into honest, meaningful conversations on ESG, circular economy, business sustainability without the fluff. Our mission is simple yet ambitious, Sustainable Bharat by 2047. And to get there, we need to understand how systematic issues like food waste, supply chain design, and nature loss impacts business strategy today. Joining us today is Philippe Schuler, sustainability consultant at Quest Impact Design Studio, author of The Wise Man and the Story of Plenty, TEDx and the keynote speaker, and outdoor photographer with a singular purpose, reconnecting humanity with nature. Over the past decade, Philippe has worked at the intersection of supply chain management, food waste, sustainability, from researching waste in fresh potato supply chains to consulting hotels and resorts in Thailand and the Maldives, to coordinating the global movement against food waste at Too Good to Go. Today, he works with organizations from SMEs to large corporates on circular economy, nature strategy, and biodiversity assessments, helping them comply with the EU requirements, creating real impact. Philip, welcome to the Carbon Circle. It's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you so much, Roshan. Pleasure being here.
Awesome. So, in this conversation, we will walk through your personal journey into food waste and systems thinking, unpack why food waste sits at the heart of planetary crisis, and explore how AI and technology can truly help or fail when it comes to supply chain transparency, and finally look at the economics of nature positive circular business models, including what this means for Indian companies aiming for a long-term resilience. Let's start with the journey that led you from potatoes to a planetary crisis, Philip. So, Philip, you didn't start your career as a sustainability consultant. You started in management and supply chain, and then food waste became a turning point. So walk us through the moment when you first realized the scale of food waste in potato supply chain and what it did to your worldview.
Yeah, of course. So first of all, thank you for inviting me, and pleasure to be here. I think I would actually, Roshan, just go even a step even further to the front when I was a bit younger, so you get a bit of the context. So the way I grew up is in a small village in Luxembourg, right next to a forest, in nature every day, and that's really what I was burning for, what I was really wanting to do every day going forwards. But of course, there comes a moment, and especially where you hear also from your family, that you have to make a living, have to find your path, find your career path. And at that moment, for me, it was very difficult at 18 years old to decide, okay, what am I going to do? And so then came international management. I thought, okay, one day I'll be a manager, one day I know all about business. So I went to Manchester to study that. Again, there I kind of felt a bit out of place in many places because I never really understood, why do we always have to make so much profit, always without even looking at the planet, without looking at resources. So even there, I was really thinking, okay, sustainability is something interesting. And at that time, it wasn't talked about as it is today. Climate change was still seen as kind of a hoax, or something that Al Gore is talking about. And more that really developed in my head, where I was really thinking, okay, how can we, connect business even more to nature? And then when I did my master's in supply chain management, those connections really started to come together. Even though all the classes that I did in supply chain management, there was maybe one slide that said sustainable supply chain management. There was not one course, there was just one slide that said it. And there I was thinking, wow, there's so much that needs to be done here. So I started a module which was completely focused on sustainable businesses, which was not part of my degree. And there I realized, okay, there's so many different sectors that are, of course, operating in the business world these days. And each of them have their own impact on the planet. And the food system is what really, gave me a moment where I was like, okay, I had no idea. For me, food is just something you eat and it's not really, doesn't really have an impact. But we'll go more in detail, of course, in a bit. But it really started to feel in me like, okay, wow, that is something that could be interesting. And just how life is in the odds that they are. Exactly at that moment, I was living with three friends of mine in Copenhagen, and at that moment, we started going behind the bins of behind supermarkets into the bins and looking at all the food that was being thrown away. We were students, so it's not that we were completely high on cash. So we did actually save quite a bit of money on that as well. But it also became a treasure hunt, kind of. We really went there almost twice a week, and we said, okay, let's go late at night. Let's see when nobody's there. And we really kind of made a game out of it. And quickly I realized, okay, this is actually a serious problem. This is something I've never thought, that so much food was being thrown away, and not food that, that was filled with rats. So, that was like not edible. It was beautiful,
Good
edible
food.
food, really good food. And you still quickly start realizing, okay, why is this happening? I still started thinking, okay, why is this such a challenge? What is going on? And that's when I connected basically what I was learning at school with what I saw in daily life, and these kind of things connected. And I said to myself, okay, I need to research this. I need to get a better understanding of this. And that's where my master thesis came out, when it came to looking at potatoes afterwards.
Oh, very fascinating. I think, I mean, given that even I have spent some time in Sweden doing my masters as well, so that's
Mm.
the treasure hunt I can relate to, because the second-hand stuff that people just discard. I mean, not just when it comes to the food, but also
Mm.
the other things like furniture and everything. I mean, for a
100%.
student who's always tight on cash, I think that always used to be the treasure place where people left their old
100%.
stuff and we could reuse it. Great, but let's dive a little deeper into your journey. So, what were you seeing in the data and on the ground that convinced you food waste wasn't just an operational issue but a systematic failure?
Yeah, I think as I started doing more and more of the research, and I chose potatoes for a reason, because the Danish, they love their potatoes. And
Mm,
it's a product that is also produced in Denmark, because, you could always have the argument in saying, well, there's a lot of food being shipped from one place to the next, and it's difficult to predict. So there will always be a certain amount of waste. So I thought to myself, well, I want to find out about a product that is actually produced in Denmark, that is a Danish produce, and where also only Danish hands are really touching it. And so I decided, I hired a car and I went to different places around Denmark when it comes to farmers, the logistic providers, the packaging. I did the whole supply chain basically all the way to the supermarket. And
mhm.
that's exactly where I realized it's a systemic issue. It is something that you cannot just pinpoint and look at the farmer and say, well, it's your fault. Or you cannot say to the supermarket, it's only your fault. It really is the collaboration between all these different entities, which is the real issue here. Whether it's the lack of traceability, the lack of transparency between all these different people, the lack of data that is also being, shown to the different entities as well, is, I think it's a crucial part of the problem. At the end of it, I would say that the big conclusion out of the research came that, and I think that's where it really is a systemic issue, is that the supermarket was really the one who was the most amount of responsible for all the food that is being thrown away on the farm level. And let me explain you why, is because retailers or supermarkets, they have this preconception that food needs to look perfect. It needs to
Yeah.
have the right shape, the right color, the right size. And they have these quality standards, they call it, or product specifications, that we
Mhm.
want to make product look perfect. Similar to us human beings, we have this beauty standard that we need to look this way. And same, we have that for food. And that means that all these product specifications are then put onto the farmers, and means that the farmer cannot even bring a lot of that produce
To the
over to the
supermarkets.
supermarket. It doesn't even make it there. And I'm talking
Yeah.
about 40% of the entire harvest not making it. For
Mm.
potatoes, that are sprouting in different shapes or forms, that have different color, that might have a black or blue spot, perfectly edible, no problem at all. Even the small sprouts that a lot of people throw things away, they're perfectly edible as well. So, that's where I realized, okay, this is really a systems issue.
Yeah.
This is like entities not talking to each other, not taking the right responsibility, and not tracing back from where the problem is actually occurring in the first place. And that's where I realized, okay, this really is a supply chain issue.
Yeah, I think we'll be definitely talking more on that problem. But what is your take from the customer's point of view? Because the supermarkets are being influenced by what the customers expect. So what are your thoughts on that, Philip?
Yeah, I think this is a perfect chicken and egg problem, right? Is it really because if you talk to the supermarket, they will tell you, well, customers such as Roshan and Philip, they like their potatoes round, they like it in the perfect color. So that's what we give to them, right? So
Mm,
that's basically why we put these protestifications. But then when you speak to customers, actually research shows that the vast majority of them are completely fine with also eating, imperfect produce, and
yeah.
more so because they become more aware of the waste that is happening. So I think it is really, one says one thing, the other says the other, and they don't really meet in the middle. So I do
Hmm.
feel that that really has to start shifting, and I think retailers need to realize, that consumer behavior is shifting, and it's also about how you communicate that over to them as well.
Sure.
So it is about embedding the customer in that journey as well and making them understand the impact that this has.
Yeah, interesting, interesting. I think we'll have a lot to unpack there. But let me ask you about your experience with the hotels and resorts. So can you describe your early phase of work where you have done some consulting for hotels and resorts in Thailand and Maldives, and what those experience taught you about behavior, incentive systems in hospitality sector?
Yeah, sure. So, linking it back to my journey when I finished my master thesis, I was ecstatic. I was like, wow, okay, I found out about this issue and this is really something that I want to do. I didn't want to follow any other career path. I was like, okay, I want to work in food waste. But the thing is, there was not that many opportunities. It's
Mm,
not like a job opportunity says we need somebody for food waste.
food waste, yeah.
That doesn't exist. So I said to myself, okay, what about I set up my own kind of independent consultancy. So I work as an independent and look for projects left and right to get that experience. And so I did that in Luxembourg and I started reaching out to a lot of different organization consultancies, telling them, let's talk about food waste, let's work together. And then I was extremely lucky to find somebody in Bangkok who created his own consultancy. It was primarily focused on plastic pollution at the time, who said, well, I'm working with hotels. I know how much food is being thrown away there. I haven't had complete focus on it yet. Let's work on get together on this. When can you come to Bangkok? And literally I said next week. I said I booked my flights and I went to Bangkok. And so I was there for 6 to 7 months. And it was an extremely eye-opening experience, not only on a cultural level, me being alone in a far-place world, but also in terms of the exposure it gave to me as well on the problem. And when you're
Mm,
looking at the hospitality sector, it has a massive lever when it comes to nudging consumers in the right direction, rethinking the way their buffets are organized, looking at how they're storing food, how they're ordering it, and how they're cooking their own food. So there's a huge amount of food being wasted along those different steps. And working together with chefs, I think, was a very privileged position to be in, actually, because those are, the magicians who make the magic happen,
yeah.
who bring all that beautiful food out to us. But you can also see the stress and the challenges that they're facing. And I think talking to those F&B professionals, to those chefs, really opened my eyes. And we are talking about, I don't know how it is in India, Roshan, but I've never been to a five-star hotel there. But in Thailand, it's unbelievable, the buffets. You have huge lines of incredible food being taken out every day that is cooked every day. And if it's not eaten on that day and it's out on the buffet due to health and safety regulation, etc., it's not brought back into the kitchen. And it's literally a guy at the end of the shift coming around with a bin and everything is tossed into it. And it
Mm,
really breaks your heart seeing that. Like once
yeah,
you have
yeah.
seen that, you don't let go.
Yeah, I mean, even in India, we have some of the best hotels and five-star resorts here, and I can imagine it being something similar to what you just narrated. And I'm very happy to know that you have an experience or a worldview that's from the east as well as the west, which gives you a very enriching sort of a
Mm.
insight into the very problem that we're now going to discuss. But Philip, if you had to summarize your journey in one sentence for a CEO listening to this, what would that sentence be?
Ooh, that's a good question. So I would really say that my journey has kind of been a supply chain in itself. So it's kind of
Mm.
like a chain of events or chain of experiences that have brought me to this place. I think it's not a normal straight line, but more of a, different kind of chain of events that have brought me to the place where I am right now, facing different challenges and decisions that have given me the perspective and the experience I have now.
Very cool, very cool. All right. So, Philip, firstly, thank you for giving an insight into your world and your journey. And it's truly enriching to learn that you have been in places and tried your hand at multiple things from food waste, potatoes, supermarkets, hospitality sector, and now doing your work as a sustainability consultant. So now let's switch gear and get into the problem statement that we are trying to address, which is why food waste sits at the heart of climate, nature, and social challenges. So we have all heard that food waste is bad, but the numbers suggest it's central to planetary crisis, not a side issue, right? So can you help us understand in systems terms why food waste is such a powerful lever in tackling climate change?
Yeah, so for me, I think again, looking at it systemically, right? If you have a produce in front of you, let's look at the potato again, because I love potatoes, and that's where the journey started for me. You're not just looking at the potato, you're looking at hours and hours of work from a farmer going
Labor.
into this. That farmer uses a huge amount of resources, whether it comes to the tractor, comes to the pesticides he might be using if he's not working organic. It comes down to the amount of water he's using over time. 70% of all the fresh water we're using goes onto food. A
Hmm.
very small margin of the fresh water we're using actually goes into showers, cleaning, etc. Even though people always say, "Oh, you take shorter showers because we are facing a changing climate." Unless you continue wasting food, you're not creating a big impact. Really,
Right.
food is where the biggest chunk of water goes to. So all the irrigation that goes into the amount of energy that is being used to it, to actually bring it all the way from the farm to the end of the retailer, whether it's by plane, by ship, by truck, by anything, there's a huge amount of resources that go into our food. And by wasting the produce, especially at the very end of that supply chain, means that you're not just throwing away that produce, you're throwing away all those resources that are embedded in that produce as well. They have all been used in vain. And that's why it creates such a massive climate impact. And that's why some even research by Project Drawdown suggests that it is actually the number one solution to reducing carbon emissions is reducing food waste. And I think that shows in itself that there's still this misunderstanding of how food systems are connected to climate change and the impact that it has as well.
Yeah. So we know that food waste is responsible for a significant share of global GHG emissions and uses, as you rightly said, enormous amount of land and water. So, but how do you explain this to executives who only think in terms of carbon targets? Because that has become the new thing when it comes to sustainability, the carbon tunnel vision. So, how would you explain this to the executives?
Well, I think the most important, and I think that's also, I've seen that challenge actually head on when I spoke to hotel managers. Maybe it wasn't a CEO, but it was a hotel manager who was responsible for an entire hotel operation. He tells me, Philip, I have a big operation here. I have so many challenges. Why do I need to focus on food waste? And
Mm.
I tell him, usually the first thing I tell him is, first, you don't even know how big the problem is. Because very often the bins, and especially that was in the Maldives and in Thailand, the bins are not separated in the right way. So that means all the food is being thrown away into the same bin as anything else. So you have
Mm.
very little visibility of how much is actually thrown away. So what I usually told them at the beginning was, don't pay me for 2 days. I'm going to come for 2 days and I will show you how much is being thrown away. And if you see the amount of food, and I give you a prediction, if that is true, you hire me and we work together. Every time it was true, Roshan.
Yeah, yeah.
Every time I
And
was able to prove to them, listen, once you start separating your bins and you start realizing where that food is coming from, how much margin is going into that bin, how much thrown away food, because it's throwing away money at the end of the day. If you're throwing away
yeah,
food, you're throwing away money. In Thailand, most of the food that is presented on those buffets is imported goods. It's not cheap food. It's salmon from Norway,
yeah.
it's caviar, whatever. It's not cheap food. So once they start realizing, okay, I can really shrink my food cost here and I can really help my margin, they start listening to you. So
Yeah, I think
really
for
making
for
it
yeah,
makes the
for
finance
consultants listening to this podcast, that's a very good insight there. Because if you can quantify data and put some
100%.
dollar terms onto it, that is more easy to convey to the executives for the kind of impact it has. It's a great insight there, Philip. So you often remind people that this is happening in a world where hundreds of millions of people are still going hungry. So, what does that paradox tell us about how our economic and food systems are designed?
Yeah, it's terribly unfair.
Yeah.
It's the end of the day. It's a horrible sight. I think you are in a perfect example in India, right? You have India is really a breadbasket for much of the region, also for the rest of the world. You have so many resources and amazing agriculture, and yet a lot of food is being thrown away because you don't might have not the right infrastructure, the logistics are not working properly. And then you have so many millions of people, even though you have so much food there, you have everything at your disposal, and yet you have millions of people who go to bed hungry. That for me is just there's something concretely going wrong here. And I think that's for me is what is the beautiful part. I think is the very important part of food waste is that it's not just, the waste of money. It's not just the waste of resources and the environmental impact, but it's also the social aspect of it. That
Yeah.
it's just completely unjust for us to throw away food knowing that other people don't have enough. That is something I learned from my grandma, was passed on to my parents, and I'm gonna pass it on to my daughter. It's just completely wrong. And it's something that we can really take care of every single day, to know that we are finishing our plates, only buying as much as we need, because it starts there. It really does.
Yeah.
It's to be aware of the consequences this has as well, and how lucky some of us are compared to others. And I think
Very true.
that's really important
Uh,
to know.
I mean, it is very unfortunate. Like you rightly said, India is one of those countries which is rich in resources when it comes to natural resources and has a very fertile land. We can you name the crop, we can grow it here. We have that kind of
Exactly.
climatic thing. But even then, India ranks very low on the global hunger index, meaning a lot of people go hungry to bed. It is an unfortunate reality, and there's this cultural values that you just highlighted, which is buy what is required, don't overconsume, don't waste food on the plate, and these are things that are also taught in Indian households. But unfortunately, the economics of it somewhere leads to conditions like this, where the large resorts, hospitality sectors end up throwing a lot of food, which can be used by people, or can be used to feed these people. Unfortunately, that's the reality. But again, I mean, we'll look at the solution aspects in
Mhm.
detail in the next segment. But let me now switch gears and get an insight onto the book that you've written. So in your book, The Wise Man and the Story of Plenty, you trace humanity's journey through abundance and overexploitation. How does food waste fit into the broader narrative of plenty and planetary crisis, Philip?
Well, I think it is the perfect example of abundance and plenty, right? I think so. I wrote the book because I realized that there's a lot of misconceptions around the issue that we're facing. A lot of people are talking about climate change, and
Hmm.
of course, it is a big problem. But for me, it's so much more than climate change. It's really our relationship with our planet, with nature, that is completely deteriorating, and that has been doing that for some time. And I think that broken connection is really what is causing us to really take so much from our planet and giving very little back. The planet
Yeah,
doesn't need us. It needs ants. It needs zebras. It
animals.
needs all these animals, amazing animals around us. It doesn't need us. It does, especially it doesn't need billions of us.
Yeah,
So when people say save our planet, for me, I'm like, no, the planet will be here. Whether we want it to be like we are
yeah,
in right now, that's a different question. So for me, food waste in itself is such a big problem as well, because of that sense of abundance. Us always taking more and more and more resources, producing more and more and more. and thinking that without consequences, we can continue throwing away more than one third of it. And it's really this kind of story of plenty for me came out because I really thought, the journey of humanity really became about because we started growing and growing and taking more and more and more this abundance, this consumerism, and really building us up to become kind of this dominant figure on this planet,
Right.
thinking, okay, well, we can just decide everything. And yes, we are really the most dominant and we have an impact on everything else, but it has consequences, short, midterm, and long term. We're already seeing it now. It's not something of the future. And it might sound, oh, this is like all very dramatic, but it is really happening in front of our eyes right now. And it really comes down to us over exploiting everything around us and just taking it all for granted and not making the connections.
Very true, very true. And I do resonate with what you just told me. Even though we are the apex species in this entire hierarchy, and we have been blessed with abundance, and there is enough for everybody. Even then, there are so many today going to bed hungry. That itself speaks volume of the problem and the kind of social problem that we today have. Because I see this not as a technical problem, but rather as a social and an economic problem there. But Philip, thank you again to give that very insight into the idea of abundance and over exploitation that you have narrated in your book, The Wise Man and the Story of Plenty. From your experience, what are the top three blind spots or nations when they think about sustainability that causes them to underestimate the impact of food waste?
Yeah, I think a lot of executives or a lot of companies, they often see it as kind of a problem that exists. They take it for granted. It's something that they actually think about in their operations already. And hotels is one good example. They take a
Hmm.
certain amount of percentage where they feel, well, we know that this is going to be thrown away. We take that into the calculation. That is part of our calculations already. And that for me is already wrong in itself. So it's
Hmm.
not going to the root of the problem. We are very good at counteracting or tackling symptoms. So that means, oh, we produce too much. Let's give it over to donations. Yes, you can give a certain degree to donations, and I think a lot of people are suffering, so you should do that. But just having that mentality of us just continuing to produce more and more and more and just giving over to donations for me is wrong. Why don't
Yeah.
we just go and thinking, let's start to prevent a lot of that actually from happening? And yes, it will never be perfect. So then we can go over to donate it. But to just rely on donations for me is the wrong strategy. So it's really going to the actual root of the problem. I think that's number one. The second one for me is really looking at food waste, not just in terms of weight and volume. And I mentioned it earlier, the number speaks volumes in many different ways, but it's also sometimes doesn't tell the full story.
Hmm.
1 ton of food being thrown away is not just 1 ton of food. It's a huge amount of water. It's a huge amount of land, huge amount of work and energy going into it. So it's not just enough to say, well, it was just 1 ton. No, there's so much more behind it. And it's really about opening the eyes and bringing that data forward as well. And it's the third one, I think, what I usually get as well, and it kind of intersects a little bit with the first one, is that a lot of people feel that it's out of their control. They feel that this is normal procedures, it has happening all the time, and this is nothing I can do about it. Yes,
Hmm.
on the one side, I can accept it, and two, actually, Philip, I don't have the right tools, I don't have the right systems in place to be able to do this. And I think in many cases, of course, you need maybe technology, you need AI, we will go into it. There's a lot of fancy solutions that exist. But very often, though, you can create a huge amount of savings already just by creating small things left and right.
Yeah.
Collaboration, traceability, thinking recipes differently, redesigning the buffet just a little bit, and you already start seeing savings and already. So it's not rocket science, a lot of it, and it's not a cost burden for many. Actually, it's the complete opposite. It's a savings heaven for many
Yeah.
when it
Yeah.
comes to food waste reduction.
Yeah, I think that gives a fresh perspective as well, because when you think of solving the problem through donating it rather than reducing your purchase scales, Maybe that's a fresh perspective because you could, I mean, if you look at the amount of waste that is being generated, you would know how much lesser have you have to procure so that
Yes.
you still meet the quality and the functionality of serving those foods in your buffets while saving on the cost. And also the fact that you just brought out the AI word into it, that today we have tools and options that could be giving so much more insights into this data so that the executives could take better decisions, which would help solve the problem in real time. Let me ask a Indian question now. So, if you were speaking to an Indian FMCG or a retail leader, what would be the most compelling business risk argument to take food waste seriously in their strategy?
I think looking at the finances, so it's a loss of margin,
Mm,
plain and simple. And
mm,
very often it is an invisible one because you have taken it into account for so many years. But
mhm,
once you really look into the data and you see how much is being thrown away, how much of your procurement is going into it, um, quickly start realizing, okay, there's actually a lot that I can benefit from here. And I think supermarkets are actually retailers are really good at nudging that away because they feel that their operation is perfect. They have done it for so many years. It's so automatic. It's quickly da 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 da. But I don't know how it is in India, but in Europe particularly, there's a very high turnover when it comes to staff, particularly in supermarkets. So also training them, giving them the right capabilities, the first in, first out principles, understanding the expiry dates. How can you prolong that? How can you find, markdowns, dynamic pricing? Some supermarkets are doing it, but I think there's still a lot of things that can be done to actually create more efficiency. And again,
mhm.
taking it back to saying, listen, it is about efficiency. It is about really, making, cutting down your costs and bringing down up savings and being able to invest in better food when you're doing so.
Yeah.
So that's the way I would look at it.
Sure. So the bottom line is speak in terms of economics. Not, I think that's
Always.
that's the easiest way to get through this through
And,
this
and, and
executives.
And to be honest, Roshan, I think that's something I've learned over time because I
Yeah.
came into this world thinking, well, every business wants to be good, wants to be just. And yes, some do, but I think the language of business is money, finances,
Money.
economics. So if you speak their language, if you get them over to your side, if you really understand their challenges and you see what is their priority, and very often that is higher shareholder value, making sure that they have enough profit. And if you bring it over to them in that language and make them understand, well, with doing that, you can also do something amazing, then you got them.
Yeah. Uh, just again to give some insight into the Indian hospitality sector. Today, there are a lot of this hospitality organizations which are into ecotourism. So, it could be put off as a greenwashing thing, but honestly, there are a lot of organizations today who take care of their water consumption, their electricity consumption, the kind of fabric that they're going to use in the hotel rooms, to the kind of food that they serve. But some of them do put out their sustainability reports annually, where they talk
Mhm.
on or they quantify the numbers and this are mentioned discreetly for their audience to see. But there is also this segment of organization who claim to be green while they don't put out this numbers out that are they truly doing this initiatives with the authenticity that was initially started out with, right? Great. So Philip, we have looked at your journey. We have also looked into the problem statement and dive deep. By now, our listeners should be able to understand the kind of impact food waste has on the climate, on the social aspect of things, and on also on the bottom line of businesses running them. So now let's look at the solution side of things, which would be more interesting for our listeners. So we'll look at the technology, AI, supply chain transparency. So today the conversation often jumps straight into technology and AI. let's build a tool, let's optimize with algorithms. So you have been speaking and podcasting specifically about AI and food waste recently. So from your vantage
Mhm.
point, Philip, where can AI and data genuinely help tackle waste across the value chain? Is it in production, storage, transport, retail, households, all the above?
All the above. Yeah,
That's easy.
I think I really think you can really yeah, mend it to the problem that you're having. I think that's the beautiful part about technology, and it's an amazing tool to have. Whether it's, using AI to look what is actually inside of a bin. I think there's a lot of smart bins that start existing. A lot of companies, particularly in the hospitality sector, where they
Hmm.
put a bin inside of the back kitchen, and a lot of the food that is then being thrown away into the bin is then being recorded with a camera where they can then say, okay, this was lasagna, this is how much it was, these are all the different ingredients that went into it. And that quickly gives an entire overview to the chef and to the kitchen staff, knowing over time, okay, maybe we should start reducing the amount of lasagna we produce because half of it is being thrown away thanks to our
Right.
smart bin. That's a very effective tool. But at the same time, supermarkets are also using it for dynamic pricing, for forecasting. So using past data to understand future trends, what is going to happen. I think that is a really big one. But I think what is quite exciting as well is, particularly in Europe, the vast majority of food being thrown away is actually at the very end of the supply chain. So it's in
Hmm.
households. And it comes back again to our conversation around abundance, is because a lot of people have so much food and they feel that the fridge always has to be full. And that means that they are very often overwhelmed with how much they have actually left and they don't know what to cook with it anymore. So AI actually, there's a lot of apps and cool ways of using AI to actually come up with recipes to understand how much, when was it bought, when do I need to eat it, how can I combine different ingredients together. So bringing back that connection to food again, I think is extremely powerful using technology as well to educate consumers in many ways as well.
Sure. So you're given three real life examples where AI can play a role. One is of optimization, so that the hospitality
Mhm.
sector can optimize their procurement, looking at the waste, or even the chefs can decide which to be what to be put on the menu, so that they don't waste the product. The second thing that you have highlighted is forecasting, because by data they'll be able to forecast better, which will allow for better decisions to be made. And the third example that you highlighted about households is about avoiding the problem of overconsumption. And maybe, I'm just thinking out loud here. If you have a set of different sort of ingredients present at your home, if you can click a picture and ask AI to build a recipe or create a recipe, it could perhaps create one, right?
Exactly.
That would
Yeah,
be very interesting.
that would be
Right,
cool.
but do you have any other examples, particularly where AI can be utilized to solve this problem in particular?
I think for me, like I mentioned, I use these examples because I've seen them firsthand. I think
Hmm.
there's also other ones, but I wouldn't put my hand into the fire where they actually worked already. I know that these three is something that I've worked in actively on, whether it's in projects or with different companies as well. So for me, those are really the key ones that I would really point out, because they really, I think what allows AI, what is powerful with AI, it gives visibility and it gives a certain way of anchoring or a certain way of making sure that food is not being thrown away. And if it is thrown away, what are the reasons for it? So really giving that visibility, which is for me the key part, because we still have that notion as humanity, out of sight, out of mind. Let's just throw it
Yeah.
away and not think about it anymore, and it's just there. And I think AI really helps us to move away from that. So technology helps us to open our eyes.
Sure, sure. When you mentioned about AI, there is a company that I did have an engagement with sometime in the past by
Hmm.
name Bentex. I'm giving a shout out to them. So they're a waste management company, but it had a very
Hmm.
unique approach to how they did it. So the company uses cameras again. So the cameras look as so in India we have I mean, depending on the cities, we have at least two categories of waste: wet waste and dry waste. So wet
Mhm.
waste being the food waste, which is kind of discarded, and it can find its way into maybe a biogas generator or composting or something like that. And the dry waste is then sent to some material recovery facilities for it to be maybe recycled or recovered or something like that, right? But this company does something unique. They look at the waste, the camera scans it, and the camera fetches data for what kind of waste is produced in which pin codes. So looking at the city, the particular pin code, it'll look at the different kind of waste, and this data can then be utilized by companies to kind of refill their supermarkets, because if you know what is the product that is being used the highest, that's the kind of product that can be put on the shelf. So very very unique
Very smart.
perspective, very very
Again,
smart.
visibility,
Absolutely,
visibility.
absolutely, absolutely. But okay, let's dive to the next question again, because I want to get into the psychology of things as well. Because what is the psychology behind how organizations adopt technology for food waste solutions, Philip? And where do they overestimate the tech or underestimate culture, processes, and supplier relationships?
Yeah, I think. Yeah, I think there's still a lot of overestimating when it comes to the technology. I think this is where, as well, where I really always used to fit in as a consultant as well, because technology can only take you that far.
Yeah,
It will not be able to answer all the questions. It will not be able to solve the problem from one day to the next. First, because you need to interpret data. You need to also find on the data as well. I think data and visibility gives you one thing, and that's great. It's something to work with, but it doesn't give you the concrete solution just yet. I think for me, technology AI is perfect to get the data, to get the visibility, to get that whole transparency, but then to bring the solutions to the table, you do need that psychological aspect. And you need to work with people who are working in the system for a very long time. You know, you can't just tell them, oh, the tech is saying this, you should act this way. If you tell that to a chef, he will look at you like, get out of my kitchen, right?
hmm,
So the chef has been there for a very long time. You bring them the technology, you tell them, listen, chef, this is what the data is suggesting. What can we do? You know, what
right.
can we rethink the menu? Can we look at recipes differently? Can we find ways of, you know, making sure that every staff that is coming in has all the skills needed to make sure that, you know, certain waste is not happening? Can we find a way to redesign the buffet? When have you done that the last time? You know, all these kind of things for me, it really comes down also the interaction between human beings. And I think that's the beautiful part as well, right? I think it really is. Food touches us all, and it really touches a nerve. Nobody wants to see food being wasted.
Yeah,
It is really a repercussion of a lot of different events. But I think if you really break it down and you have the data in front of you and you say you genuinely want to help, then they start acting as well. I think data in itself or technology, you will not get people to move just alone. You need that also, that human interconnection, the psychological aspect, as you said, you know, putting them in putting yourself into their perspective as well and understanding the issues or the challenges they're facing.
sure, sure. So what it's stating is technology can take us that far, and beyond
Mhm.
that, finding a concrete solution to that requires maybe an intent that drives that through the management. But I want to take a step back and look at the human psychology again, because a lot of us today, the more richer the nation becomes, the more waste it generates, right? So I don't see this being a money problem or a social problem, but rather an behavioral science related problem there. So what would you suggest? I mean, if you were to take a role of educationist who were
Mhm.
to influence young minds, what would you do so that right from the early days we see food as something of value and not to be just thrown away?
Yeah, well, I've done it my part as well in Thailand. Actually, I worked with a school where we went into the canteens as well. So it was actually a canteen that was run by a company, and they said, you know, we have it in hotels, but we also have it in school canteens. Would you be able to help us there as well? So we said, yeah, of course. You know, let's help to reduce the food waste there as well. And there, I told also the actual manager of the company as well. I said, well, yes, we can help you to reduce the amount of food being thrown away, but that involves talking to the kids, because at the end of the day, they are the ones who leave a lot of things on their plate. What we have seen through the data is not your chef or the food that you're putting on that's actually doing that quite well. What we're seeing is that the biggest amount of food that is being thrown away is what is coming from the plate. It's not at the
Right.
back of the kitchen, it's coming from the plate. So that means I have to start now thinking about, okay, how can I engage with the kids in a different way? And
Mhm.
there we did some remarkable tests, I think, Roshan. I think that really opened my eyes. And I think, kids, once you really explain to them in through storytelling, through beautiful ways, where food is coming from, why it is so important to eat everything from their plate, to only take as much food on their plate as they can actually eat, and then to be able to go for seconds, for example. So really changing that, because that's cool. For example, they said only kids can only come once, where I said that for me is rubbish. Like you have more than enough food here. Let them come a second time, and that in itself, was a big step. But one thing that we did, for example, and I think that shows just the behavioral science of us human beings, is what we did was we put a bin on the scale because we needed to weigh the amount of food being thrown away every day. But behind the bin, we put a massive mirror,
Mhm.
and we wrote down, "You are a food waste warrior,"
Oh, that's
right?
cool.
And just within that week, and I'm not exaggerating, we had 40% reduction in food being thrown away from the plate because kids saw themselves scraping food from the plates, and just seeing themselves in the mirror, they're like, "Ooh, I'm doing something wrong here. I know that this
Yeah.
is wrong. I have to do this better tomorrow." And it's kind of this exposure that they feel, okay, I'm looking myself in the mirror. The kids next to them in the queue, they're like, "Oh, he's throwing something away. Maybe there might be a camera. We know that we shouldn't be doing this." So that in itself created that behavioral science part where they were like, okay, that is actually something that I shouldn't be doing. And so we ended up actually leaving the mirror there because the school was like, "No, I think that's a great idea. It makes the room look bigger as well. It's good with the light and it helps with this." And kids starting fooling around as well. They saw the mirror and they were like, "Oh, this is great." But it helped on the food waste part as well. And
For
I
sure.
think that in itself, and that's where I said, that's not tech helping to solve this. That's thinking about, okay, how do kids operate these days?
Yeah.
How do humans operate? They don't
Mhm.
want that to be exposed in a certain way. They don't want to be the part of the problem. And that really helped to solve the issue in that
Yeah,
school in
yeah,
itself.
yeah. Yeah, so, I mean, teaching them young is definitely something that I think the education system too has to be taking care of. But the solution that you just talked about, setting up a mirror right where you throw your waste, is something I think even if there are company owners or business owners listening to this, maybe they can implement this in their own canteens. Should be allowing them to do some amount of social nudging so that it could lead to a better decision making while throwing away the waste, right? Uh,
Yes.
Great. So, Philip, let me ask you a different question now. So, you have highlighted that a large share of food waste happens at household level due to misrepresenting labels like "use by" or "best before." I mean, that's a usual problem that many households have. In that context, how useful is AI compared to simple behavioral change interventions?
Yeah, I think AI in itself, I think, can help. Particularly now, I think there's some companies that are creating these smart fridges,
Hmm.
where they are actually giving you a notification in terms of what food has been entered last that needs to be eaten first. It
Hmm.
kind of sees through the labels that this is the expiry date, so that means Philip needs to eat it in 1 or 2 days. So that's kind of like giving that again, sorry to repeat myself, but again, giving that visibility around what
Yeah.
you have is where technology and AI is extremely powerful so that you can act on it in that way as well. And I think you just mentioned it. I think the biggest issues when it comes to households, again, it's not rocket science. It's very often an overfilled fridge where we feel, the fridge has to have that sensation of being full. And as we are buying more and more foods, the old foods get stacked at the back of the fridge and we forget about it.
Right.
So for us, also going to the supermarket without a shopping list,
Hmm.
something very old-fashioned, something very simple, but so impactful. Like honestly, I plead everyone to do it when they go to the supermarket to first look in all of their fridge in their different parts of the kitchen to understand what do they really need. Why do I need to go to the supermarket? What do I need to buy? Because
Right.
supermarkets are extremely, extremely smart the way they are being designed. and the way they are marking down their product so that they make you buy more than you actually need. And that is very often the case where people go onto supermarket. Maybe they're even one mistake I always did was to go to the supermarket when I'm hungry. Don't go to the supermarket when you're hungry because you buy more. And don't go to the supermarket when you don't have a list because
Yeah, you need to have a
supermarkets will
checklist.
try to buy you more. And I
Yeah,
think that is, I think, two very simple things in itself. And then one last thing, and that's something because it's close to my heart. It's an initiative also that I started with a company called Too Good To Go, is all around expiry dates. Because very often still a lot of food is being thrown away because rely on the date that it says on top of a product. And very often that date is just an indication. It doesn't mean that you will die the second it passes that date. It's just to give you a bit of an idea, okay, how good the shelf life is. And there's a big difference between a use by date and a best before date. A use by date is really put onto products such as meat, fish, products that are, for health and safety reasons, because salmonella might happen, etc. So there might be bacteria creating.
yeah,
That should be produce that should be eaten by that date. That is really like the final date where you should say, okay, that's it. But that is a very, very little amount of produce that I'm talking about here. The vast majority of produce out there have a best before date. And that is simply a date. And I'm being serious about this, where supermarkets go like this and they're like, how should we do it? 1 week, 2 weeks? Yeah, let's do 1 week and a half. That's how they think about those
random
numbers.
decisions. Yeah,
Random numbers, thinking just like, okay, let's just do it in this way. And the
yeah,
problem is that consumers, they rely on those numbers. And there was actually
sure.
research done in Denmark where they saw that 50% of all the yogurts that are being thrown away have never
Hmm.
even been opened. So that means they're being thrown away just because of the date that it says on the package.
Yeah,
And this is where I really try to tell people is like, first, look at the product. Yes, okay, the date might say something, but then you're not going to die by opening the yogurt. Looking at it, does it have mold? Has it changed the color? Is it still a white Greek yogurt like you always eat it? So the first one is looking at it, smelling at it. Does it smell acidic? You will smell if a yogurt is bad. I can tell you.
yeah,
Same when it comes to milk, you will smell it. And then tasting it. Having a small taster of it is not going to kill you. You're not going to get diarrhea. You're not going to die. So having a small taste of it, and if it tastes sour, if it doesn't taste like it should, yes, then you can throw it away. But if all those three steps are taken into account, you're going to be fine. You're going to be more
yeah.
than fine. And I think that kind of understanding for me is extremely key for people to go through and to have that in their daily life, in their daily habits at home as well.
Sure, sure. And good suggestions. Some of them I myself also kind of try and follow when I go to the supermarket. Not the first though. I mean, that's not something that I've thought of before. But I always tell to myself and my family to carry a checklist before you enter supermarket, so that
Mm,
you only buy things that you went out to buy. Because if you do not walk into a supermarket without a checklist, you end up buying something that you never thought of, and that's how
100%.
supermarkets are designed for, right? Yeah, that's a very good insight for people listening in who go to supermarkets for their everyday consumption. Uh, Let me ask you this: how do you structure the financial relationship when you introduce a tech solution? Because I'm talking from the data point of view. Who owns the data? Who bears the cost of implementation? And who captures the savings?
For me, the data is always owned by the client.
Mm.
That for me is extremely important. First, because I think if you start coming to them and saying, by the way, I will use this data and this is my data, they will look at you, well, no, you're going to go to the competitor and that competitor will learn from it, etc. So for me, that data, I learn a lot from it now because I have a conversation with you. I remember a lot of the data. I don't quote companies because that's not just the way I operate,
Mhm.
but I learn a lot from that data in itself, and I can go to the next client and really, bring that forward as well. I don't need the hard data. So the hard data always stays in the company because that's really their bread and butter is what helps them to operate. And I think for me, it's showing that trust and showing to them that transparency in all of this is really the key. And data is an enabler to really make them change their operations in a good way. Because
Mhm.
change management sometimes is something people are very afraid of. They're like, well, we've been operating like this for many years. It has worked so well. We have so much profit. It's like, yes, but let's look at it from a different perspective. Let's try to think about all the things that you haven't unearthed yet, things that you might think, okay, I've never thought of it that way because there's still so much untouched potential here. And I think if you really bring that across, especially through hard data, and bringing that hard data and translating it into the financial estimates and financial savings, I think then people will start listening to you. I think that is really the crucial part. And of course, and that's why I always mention, also Roshan, what I mentioned to you is tech is great, but there's also a cost lever behind tech. If you go into a company and say straight away, "Oh, we have this amazing tech, we help you to solve it," straight away they think, "Oh, tech cost."
How much it
But
cost?
if you tell them, we will use technology in a certain way, we will test it first, we'll bring the hard data, we'll bring solutions to the table. If you want, you can continue that tech going forward. I think it's a very different conversation that you're having. And I think it's to just rely on the tech is for me is not right. It's not
Yeah.
enough.
Yeah, that's a good suggestion there again for consultants who are reaching out to companies with the solutions, because when you reach out, the way you present the tool or the product is extremely important, because the cost attached with the product is always going to be one key factor for the clients to make a decision on the purchase of the same product, right? Again, let me ask you an Indian question in the solution part. Okay. So if an Indian retailer or a quick commerce platform were to come to you today and said we want to use AI and cut food waste by 50%, what would be the
Mhm.
first three questions you would ask them before touching any code?
Are you already measuring the amount of food you're being thrown away?
Hmm.
I think it's a crucial part. Um, then I would say, maybe it's not a question, but I would say, take me through your entire process
Hmm.
of how your supermarket is being designed, and really understanding the way they're operating.
Hmm.
And then I would say, why 50%?
Where that mark?
I, yeah, why that mark? Why is 50%? Why does that touch you, Roshan? Why
Yeah.
is it 50%? Why not 30? Why not 20 first and then thinking, okay, we have 20, then we go for 70. Why 50? Why is that an important one? And I think that is, for me, is always an important one to ask, because targets are sometimes also a bit like expiry dates set like this. And you make sure as well, when it comes to targets, by when do those targets want to be reached? And
The
why is it
timeline.
that target? So the timeline, right? And I think, it's important to understand the reasoning behind it, and you understand their perspective and their reasoning behind it, because then you're able to help them solve that problem. If you don't understand it and jumping in, I think it would be hard. You will face a lot of
Sure.
challenges.
Sure, sure. Very important questions. I again agree with you on that, because understanding the reason why the targets are set and the timeline that they're looking at, I think the reason behind it becomes extremely crucial for a consultant to be working alongside players like this. Two is, how much data do they already have? Have they been tracking data? That's the second aspect. And the third is understanding their process in depth, so that you will be able to provide a custom solution that fits their requirement precisely, right? Philip, this has been very enlightening so far. With one looking at the problem itself, the scale and the depth of the problem, and also you have touched on AI and the likely solutions it could provide with bringing about visibility. Though tech cannot solve everything for us, it could do the heavy lifting. And of course,
Mhm.
the solution implementation has to be done by the humans themselves. And we also looked into the psychology behind it, about wasting, the social angles of it, and also the key and important questions for consultants to ask players in the market, so that we'll be able to help them with custom tech or custom solutions, right? Okay, so we'll move to the fourth aspect of today's conversation, which is the economics of food waste and the nature of positive business, from risk and opportunity for Bharat 2047, because the entire podcast, the Carbon Circle, has been centered around the theme, the Vikasit Bharat. The Vikasit Bharat theme being the 100th year of India's independence. So we would wish to see a developed version of India by then. Uh, so let's talk money, because for most of our listeners, business case is where change either happens or does not. We have heard that global food loss and waste costs enormous economic losses, and that cutting waste is one of the fastest ways to unlock savings and resilience in food systems. But there is also a larger story here around nature positive circular business model. So you help clients with nature strategies and biodiversity assessments. How do you
Mhm.
connect food waste reduction to broader nature positive action and circular economy designs in sectors like food, clothing, or constructions?
Yeah, I think for me, it always depends with which client you're talking to and the issues that they're facing, and there's always a different entry point, right, that you go on. But I always love to also, and I think that's something I've done most of the time as I've worked as a consultant, is to really work on different initiatives with the clients. So to not just say, okay, we've solved that problem, that's it now, goodbye. To really understand as well, okay, how can we go further than this? How can we help you to really rethink your business in a different way as well and to become more efficient when it comes to food waste, making sure that there's a waste reduction and that fits perfectly into circular economy. Waste in itself is something that we humans have invented. Doesn't exist in nature. Everything is brought back into a system and it's a use to it. But we have created that linear system whereby we are using resources only once and we are okay by wasting some of it at the end or throughout the process. So really bringing that whole circularity aspect to it is something that I work with on a daily basis. So really thinking about that, closing that loop, and really thinking, okay, if something is thrown away, can it not be used for something else? And I think that circularity in itself, and in terms of that, the money terms speak huge because instead of buying new resources, you can use resources that have otherwise been wasted, bringing it back into the system and making sure those resources are not wasted. So you're saving money with that as well. So I think that's for me is basically food waste in a nutshell. And then when it comes to the nature part, I think it's really thinking about again, we are specifically now when it comes to food waste, we're in a food system which heavily relies on nature. Without nature, we would have no food, plain and simple. Food
Yeah.
in itself is nature. So it is really key to understand as well, how is the food produced? Where is it coming from? What is the impact on it? So really looking at it in terms of impact and dependencies in that sort of sense, but also looking into what are some of the risks and opportunities that exist when it comes to relating back to nature. Because the food system, and that is what makes the food system quite extraordinary, is the food system in itself is the biggest sector which has the biggest amount of impact on nature in terms of the amount of land it uses, the impact on biodiversity, the water, the emissions. So it has a massive impact, but it's also going to be the first sector that feels the full weight of all the things that are happening on our planet right now. The negative aspect will have that weight. It will go straight onto the food system as well. You know, we mentioned it before our conversation, Roshan, when it comes to monsoon rains. The food system in itself has a massive impact, and yet, because if the monsoon rains are not coming, the first one to feel that is going to be agriculture and food.
Yeah.
So, the food system in itself has this beautiful aspect of, they have a huge impact, so they can reduce the impact, but also because they know that the first ones to suffer from what is going to happen is going to be their sector as well. It's going to have a lot of price volatility. It's going to have impact on their supply chain, massive impact on their suppliers. So things will not come back on time. The quality aspect of things, which is often overlooked, the whole nutritional aspect of it, the quality of the food is going to deteriorate. So they have this, you have to have that understanding, particularly in the food system, that nature really builds on everything that you have. And it's really the core of everything. And I think bringing that together and really creating that nature strategy and bringing, food businesses closer to nature is a key aspect of it.
Philip, can you give me an example of how a nature strategy would look like for a company?
Yes. So for me, a nature strategy, again, coming back to data. So first coming to creating a baseline. So where are you operating at the moment? What is the current assessment of your biodiversity, but also in terms of the entire impact that you have on nature? So creating that, and that is through scientific partners that I'm using. I'm doing it not myself because that's
Hmm.
extremely technical and very scientific. So rather than me doing it, I rely on professionals, on scientists, on researchers to do that. So bringing that data together And once you have that, it's really looking at RIDO or DIRO or the different acronyms that exist. So it's about dependencies, impact, risks, and opportunities.
Okay.
So breaking down all these different ecosystem services that exist, such as water disposal, for example. I think water is always a good example. So let's say, there's a business which has a massive impact on water, is to understand, okay, what is the impact? Where are your operations right now that are using the most amount of water? How dependent are you on fresh water? What is it for within your operations that you need water for? And what is the risk of no fresh water being there anymore? How severe is that risk? Is it something that is short, midterm, long term? Can we put financials to it? Can you source it from somewhere else? If you don't, well, this is something you should act upon. And four is opportunities. I think you always have to look at, if you just come with negative news, businesses are going to shut off. So you also have to bring them opportunities and best practices and tell to them, well, yes, you're dependent on fresh water. Yes, it is a risk, but have you thought about this solution? Have you thought about being more efficient? Have you thought about, getting the rainwater and using that, for example, for some of your operations, and thinking about it in terms of cost saving, but also in terms of the impact that they might have on that operation as well as an opportunity, is also something that really revels in them. And then once you have that information, it's about setting targets, smart targets, so really timeline to it that are measurable. And then setting a strategy to say, okay, well, this is what I'm going to act upon. I'm not perfect. I cannot do everything. I think that's really important. So really thinking about materiality. So what is material to my business? What is the core of my business? What is most important? Because I can't do everything. And then setting that strategy around it. That for me
That's
is
a
the important part.
very scientific approach to addressing this problem. And I mean, it was only last week we put out a podcast. I had a gentleman by name Ian Watt from Scotland. We were talking about TCFD, the Task for Disclosure thing, where we talk about risk assessments and all of that. And I mean, we were discussing on the same parameters because assessing the risk of climate change is vital for many businesses, because only when you look into the risks will you be able to think about solutions, the opportunities, and the way to mitigate those risks. And we were talking on the same line that you just mentioned, because agriculture is one such sector which will be first impacted as a result of climate change, which will likely disrupt the entire supply chain, which will then lead to multiple other problems going forward, right? But again, thank you, Philip, for giving a very scientific approach to addressing this issue with nature strategies for solving the problem of food waste, and through tech, of course, data-driven solutions there. Now, let me ask you this. So, what are some practical levers for, let's say, from procurement, product design, logistics, or partnership that organization can use to align profit models with regenerating ecosystems rather than depleting them? Because today, now we don't even talk about sustainability. We are talking about regenerative sustainability. That is where the new concept is heading towards. So, what are your thoughts on that? What are the practical levers there?
Yeah, I think that's the future. I think that's where things are going, because ultimately, if we continue with business as usual, we'll continue to have the same issues. So I think regeneration, so using more with what we have, I think is really important. And I think these terms are very often thrown left and right, but I think one term that is for me even better than regenerative is nature positive. So really thinking about it in terms of, instead of doing less harm, so trying to reduce the impact, let's do more good. How can we make sure that the operations that we are doing is not just doing less harm or reducing the impact, but is actually increasing the positive impact? So thinking of it on a positive scale, how can I create better things? And you mentioned all these different aspects of business. Each and every one of them has a lever, has an impact. It comes down to procurement is one. You mentioned procurement, right? Is how do I source my products? How do I source my materials? How do I engage my suppliers so that they have the right standards, the right best practices in place? How do I make sure that they are, have the right training, the right utensils, the right inputs to be able to actually deliver that to me? Because very often, and I think that's one of the key issues here in the Europe at the moment, is we have these targets and businesses need to meet them, whether it's EUDR, so deforestation regulation, CSRD, all these amazing things that have been put in place. But the problem is these businesses are putting it in place, but suppliers are not ready. the farmer in India doesn't know what CSRD is or what in terms of data transparency and all of that. So you need to find ways of going to the farmer, of understanding, how can we make sure that they get up to speed, that they find new ways of doing it, that is also cost effective for them, and that is also kind of helping them to solve that problem. And I think this is where the biggest chunk of my work is right now, I would say, because of supply chain, is, because these operations are facing these challenges and they have to meet those targets, but they don't know how to engage those suppliers and get them on board, and
Yeah.
understanding, how can they actually make sure that they also move in the same direction. Because if they don't do that, they will never be able to meet those targets. So that misalignment in many different ways, I think that's the exciting part at the moment, but it's a big challenge, to come to
Yeah.
that point or to make
Yeah,
it better.
I mean, just that that you brought this point out. We ourselves have been getting a lot of inquiries around CBAM, right? CBAM being one such
Mm,
example, the carbon border adjustment mechanism. Uh, so, the what Europe is doing is really interesting and fascinating in terms of climate action. There
mm,
are these frameworks, policies that are coming into play, while businesses out of Europe are ready and well versed with its requirements to the larger extent, the suppliers are not, and this is where the gap is, and unfortunately today that's become the reality.
mm.
And the bigger problem here is who bears the cost of these exercises, right? That's always the catch 22. I mean, as
100%.
you rightly, yeah, that's always the question going to be. Okay, let me ask you an alternate question here. So, how should Indian business leaders think about balancing growth, food security, and nature positive action over the next 2 decades, Philip?
Mm. Yeah, I would say, of course, for India, I think for me, coming from a Western country and saying, well, you should not grow, I think it's just wrong, right? I
Mm,
think first and foremost, I think for me, that's one of the key problems actually that I'm seeing these days as well, is this finger pointing. We as Europeans, we as Americans, we were able to grow and have this massive, plenty and abundant planet and use it to our detriment and become so dominant and created economies that, put us at the top of the world. And then telling countries who are developing, oh, but you cannot use coal. Oh, but you cannot grow in that same amount. And I think that for me is extremely wrong, because, who are we to tell you what to do? What we should do instead is come up with technologies and ways of best practices that we learn from, because we have the money, we have the technology to be able to do it. And then going to Indian businesses and saying, hey, we have this. Let me help you leapfrog us, or let me help you understand how you can actually become better with this as well. And I think that for me, maybe I'm too idealistic, I don't know, but that for me is for me the future. I think that's the way it's going to be. If we don't do it in such a way, we're talking about India, but we're also talking about Africa. Like you look at Nigeria, they have massive populations. If they don't find ways of doing green energy, if they don't find ways of creating nature positive regenerative agriculture, we are in trouble.
yeah,
We really
yeah,
are in trouble. And so for me, it's about, for Indian businesses and for developing nations, I think it's really important. Of course, growth, you cannot take it away from it. But if you find growth in a certain way that is in line with nature and that makes sure that your business will still exist, looking at all the risks that you're facing, particularly local risks in India, it's very local. It's not just a risk, oh, it might happen in South America and Africa. It will happen in India as well. India is really at the epicenter of climate damages. So really looking at it in terms of, yes, I can grow as a business, but can I do it in such a way by looking at all those different risks and taking those opportunities by being in line with nature? For me, that's the holy grail. And you can do it. Yes,
right.
it will take some initiative. Yes, it might take a certain amount of costs at the beginning, but the remaining of it really is really astonishing in what you can do with it as well. And you will thrive compared to the rest that will suffer. There's
Sure.
no hiding
I
from
mean,
it.
yeah, that's purely about the growth part of it, because as a developing nation, we got to be focusing on certain demands and requirements of the population, because we have a growing demand for energy, which means that more energy demand requires more energy consumption. That's one area. But what are your thoughts on food security? I mean, see, the West Asian, or no, I'm not saying West Asian, the Western countries have developed over a period of time by using resources that were made available to them through industrial revolution and all of that. Uh, there are definitely certain learnings that you would have had in that entire journey, right? So
Yes.
as an aspiring country to be a developed nation, when it comes to food security, what are your thoughts on that? Are there any suggestions or any learnings that you could share?
Yeah, so I think one nice anecdote or nice story that I would like to share is in a project that I did with Uganda, and with the Ugandan government, because they were looking at food waste as well, and they said there's so much food being thrown away and never even making it to the market. So the biggest issue that they thought was the gap between when the food leaves the farmer making it to the market. There's a gap here, and there's a lot of food being thrown away. And I think India has a similar
Similar.
issue because it has the logistic aspect of it. It hasn't got the air-conditioned trucks, etc. And what they were looking at was exactly that. In Uganda, they said, oh, we need those trucks. We need better technology. I think we need to find better ways of getting to the market, having better shelf life. Maybe it's the farmer who is the problem. And through research that was done and discussions, and I was not part of all of that research prior to that, but that's really the discussions that we were having. What really came out of it was the biggest thing you can do is creating better roads,
Mm,
better infrastructure. That was all that was needed. So that's what I mean with it's not about better technology or thinking AI or buying these coal trucks. Yes, they do help, but let's go to the very, very core of the problem. The core of the problem, what was in Uganda, was that farmers basically had all of this food that was being left. People were picking it up, but the roads were so bad that they had to take detours. They were stuck in traffic. They were not able to make it to the B connection after all as well. And through all of that time, the shelf life started deteriorating and it was thrown away.
right.
So that in itself, an air condition could do it. An air conditioned truck could do it as well. Yes, they stay air conditioned for a long time, but the cost
Mhm.
burden is extremely high. But what about infrastructure? Because that has also a second, aspect of actually creating better infrastructure for people as well. They can travel better between different work. People can go by bike differently. People can walk in a better way because roads are there. So it has these different, ripple effect as well. So creating better roads, better infrastructure actually helps them in that sense as well. And how it connects to food insecurity, well, if there's no food on the market, people will not have enough to eat, plain and
Yeah.
simple. For a lot of people, a lot of, and particularly in developing nations, more and more people are going to urban areas. They're moving away from farms. That means, they're further away from where food is being produced. And that doesn't help the aspect as well because the further they are from food source is, that they are more prone for food insecurity maybe as well because they're not so close to it as well. So that I think in itself, really going to the core of the problem and really analyzing, okay, where with the data and the insights and what when you're talking to people on the ground, that's what came out of it. And so it doesn't have to be rocket science, as I mentioned earlier. It really is
Sure.
about thinking, what kind of infrastructure improvements can we do as well? And that will
Sure.
help
Sure.
with food insecurity as well.
Yeah, I think India has majorly improved on its infrastructure. There have been great roads uh, because there is a huge focus given on the infrastructure. When I say infrastructure, it relates to railway lines, roads, ports, airports, and a significant improvement has happened on that side of things. And even when it comes to logistics, that's also something that has been taken care of. Even then, on the Global Hunger Index, this is one such report that's been presented by the West. We rank significantly low on that, uh, meaning many people go hungry to bed, right? And also the part that adds to the problem is the population density that we have. We are a country with 1.4 billion people, which is 20% of the global population. So that's a huge ask. But I think the suggestion that you gave and the example that you quoted from Uganda is still relevant to the remote parts of the country. Because if they had good infrastructure, good access to the roads, especially when it comes to perishables, I think the time it takes to the market, that's of extreme significance. The time that I mean the amount of time, if it can be shortened for it to reach the marketplace, I think that's that much more value added there. Great. I have one last question, Philip. So this is, and thank you so much for giving your insights and thoughts and sharing your experiences on this very topic of food waste and food security. So at Carbon Mandal, we speak about Sustainable Bharat by 2047 as a long-term horizon, resilient supply chains, credible ESG strategies, and businesses that thrive without overshooting planetary limits. So, if you imagine an Indian organization working with you on food waste and nature strategy, and with Carbon Mandal on ESG strategy and carbon accounting, where could a consulting partner like Carbon Mandal add the most value to your work?
I think partnerships are always valuable. I think if there's a win-win for both sides, I think it is always extremely useful. I think what really helps me with working from consultants from the actual country is insights. I think what really adds value is understanding perspectives on the ground. I've been fortunate to have traveled a lot of places around the world and to have worked in a lot of different places and worked with different organizations operating globally. And yet I still have a lot to learn. So, it's about getting those local insights, I think for me is extremely
Yeah.
valuable. That's the one thing. And the second thing as well is that each organization, might have a lot of different topics that they are, that they want to focus on and that they can deliver. But there might be some that they are very specialized in on very specific. For me, that, for example, that's food waste. That's kind of my baby. And that's where I've started on and where I love to do projects, even though I do a
Hmm.
lot of other projects such as nature strategy, circular economy for fashion. I'm working with a construction company right now, so I'm also spreading my wings, but my specialty is food waste, right? So to understand also the specialty of other organizations and understanding, how can we work together to get, those perfect insights and that experiences, I think that is the key. And I think that's the beautiful part. And for me, yeah, collaboration is extremely important in this day and age, and to not work against each other, but work together, and to find ways of making it possible and making it a win-win. Because I do believe that, yeah, it is always possible to find a way.
Sure. Uh, Philip, this was a great conversation and a very engaging conversation that we have had. And truly thank you for doing this.
Mhm.
Philip, this has been a rich conversation from potatoes and hotel buffets to AI, positive nature positive strategies, and the economics of regeneration. We have heard that food waste is not a side topic. It's responsible for a significant share of the global emissions, uses vast amount of land and water, and represents a huge amount of lost value every year. We have also heard that tackling food waste is one of the most practical entry points into systems thinking, linking climate, biodiversity, water, soil, and social justice, and that technology only works when it's grounded in human behavior, supply chain engagement, and good governance. Finally, you have reframed the challenges as an economic opportunity. Companies that redesign their supply chains, embrace circularity, and invest in nature positive strategies for more resilient, more competitive, and better aligned with both regulations and global investor expectations. So, for listeners who want to go deeper into Philip's work, I highly recommend his book, The Wise Man and the Story of Plenty, which traces humanity's journey through abundance and asks whether we have been wise in how we have used it. You can learn more about Philip's speaking, consulting, and photograph by visiting philipschuler.com and following him on LinkedIn for regular insights on sustainability, systems thinking, and nature reconnection. If today's conversation resonated with you, whether you're in food, retail, hospitality, manufacturing, or infrastructure, and you're wondering how to translate these ideas into your organization's context, that's exactly where Carbon Mandal can partner with you. We help organizations design and implement ESG strategies, carbon and GHG accounting, and circular interventions that move beyond carbon tunnel vision, reconnecting food waste reduction, nature positive actions, and regulatory compliance into a coherent roadmap for your business. To explore how we can support you in your journey towards a sustainable Bharat 2047, visit www.carbonmandal.com to reach out to us for a discovery conversation where we can map your supply chain hotspots, your ESG commitments, and your opportunities for impact. Philip, thank you again for joining us on the Carbon Circle. It was an absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much, Roshan. Pleasure was mine. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll stop the recording now.